All right, everybody, it is time for Eastside Connect for May 9th. We're talking with TruLegal, and our guest today is Kwame. And we are going to work on a little bit this topic, to own or not to own, leases and what to watch for. And we're going to talk a little bit in this hour about why that's an important topic and what we do with it. So happy to have the folks on the show here. We'll do some introductions. Before we do, I'd love to introduce the annual sponsors for ISABA. So we'll do a screen share here and give them a shout out, as is customary on our virtual show. We've got fantastic Eastside sponsors. Are those showing up, everybody?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Ideal Printers, DV Creative, and Harrington Langer and Associates. We've got sponsorship from WasteWise and Energy Smart and State Farm. Juan Cervantes is the State Farm agent that is also a silver sponsor. The Sane Foundation, Premier Banks, Blaze Credit Union, recently rebranded from Highway, mHealth Fairview, the St. Paul Port Authority, Metro State University, Mueller Memorial, Walters Recycling and Refuse, and Health Partners. Thank you, annual sponsors. All right, let's hear a little bit about who's on the show and see if I can come back to the gallery here. All right, so we've got some folks on the show today who are interested in this topic. I'm glad you're here. We've introduced, we've all talked about these and many other topics, as we sometimes do, but let's go ahead. We've got, so if you are an Eastside business if you serve an Eastside business, just go ahead and raise your hand. I think it's only you, William. There you go. Oh, Anne, okay. Yeah, you're an Eastside organization. You're a company.
No, I do own a business. I'm a partner in a concrete business.
That's right. Okay, let's talk about that. So we've got William Schultz from Keller Williams and from Vivid Concepts, who's also the president of ISABA's board, newly dubbed on Wednesday. Welcome, William. We got Anne DeJoy, co-host and co-owner of a concrete.
Designs and Concrete.
Designs and Concrete. That's right. That's your partner's business. Yeah. Cool. Welcome, Anne. If you are a part of an Eastside nonprofit, go ahead and give us a wave. All right, there we go. We've got Shatika Flowers from Family Values for Life, also on ISABA's board. Good to see you. Matt Anderson from ESNDC and Anne from ESNDC. Another hat she wears. I just love learning a new thing about Anne. That made the whole hour worth it for me right there. I'm Paris Dunning. I'm the director of the Eastside Area Business Association. We've got Kwame with us today from TruLegal, and we're going to be talking about this topic. Oh, Yanni, you're in your car at the border. We saw his passport earlier. But Yanni is which hat are you wearing today, Yanni?
I am wearing the Midway Green and Granite, the hard surfaces, quartz, granite, tile, natural stone.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And that's the business that Yanni runs, and is also an ISABA member with that business. Yanni's also the president of District 1 Community Council and does a lot of other awesome things in the community for sure. Okay, those are the live participants. Go ahead, Yanni. Anything else to say about that?
District 2.
Oh, did I say District 1? I guess you just annexed them, man.
Right.
That can only happen in a virtual meeting. All right, we're dropping that topic and moving on. I asked you to think about this topic at the top of the order here as we just get into what we're thinking about here. So when you hear the words ownership and owner, what are some things that come to mind? I'm going to share the ones from the chat and ask the gallery that's live here to think if there are other things that come to mind too, and we'll just pop those out loud. So stretch, everybody. We're going to stretch for 2 or 3 more answers, but here are the ones that came to mind readily. When you hear the word ownership or owner, it signals, or you think of, responsibility, assets, control, stakeholder, family wealth creation. Everything about this belongs to me, including the benefit and the responsibility. Those are great. Those are great answers. What else comes to mind? Anything else that comes to mind around ownership or owner? ahead.
Taxes, property taxes.
Access or taxes. I heard access and taxes. I guess we could also say access, huh? Taxes.
I think sometimes the owner could be considered the bad guy.
Ah. Bad
Liability.
liability. All right, see, the senior underside is coming out. What else? Anything else come to mind? Those are great additional ads. All right, this is good. So one of the things that I wanted to cue us up with today is that we've been talking a lot about ownership, local ownership, building ownership, owners of businesses owning the place that business is. And I want to say that we often have sometimes, and some of these words are very positively disposed. We think about ownership as being a good thing. Do we have one that's, yes, about control? We think about the owner as, so these are things I think about a lot too with you. Well, one of the things that's come to mind for me lately is that ownership is also just a concept. And when we suddenly divide something that maybe never had ownership before, like land or building or structure, and we think about who's gonna control it, we divide it into something that can be sold and resold and resold and resold again. We also think about something that could very much equal a lot of money for somebody. And one of the things that a kind of a notional concept that gets laid upon land and buildings can do is it can make things very complex. Ownership can be very complicated. And I think this is one of the things I'm really excited about talking with this crew today about and learning from Kwame, because a lot of the conversations we're having about owning your building or stepping up and owning property or who controls the decisions about something, a lot of the time that often comes down to an owner that may not be very invested in our community. That owner may not pass by that structure or walk on that land as often as a community member that lives around the street, just around the corner. But the benefit of owning it doesn't accrue to those community members that touch that building or walk past that building or kind of on that land in the same way at all. So we have a lot of benefit that accrues. The benefit and responsibility as was also put in. Financial risk was added to the list as well. There's a risk and responsibility and benefit that are all not simple. That's the kind of thing I want us to kind of hold a little bit here as we think about this. And especially as we think about the business owners that we talk to or the organizations that are thinking about how do we get into ownership and what's important about it and how do we understand it, is that businesses are juggling a lot. And this, how do I learn about ownership, is another one of those questions that doesn't naturally come for folks. I know there's a commercial real estate agent on this call because he's the president of my board. And William, when I think, and Ann and Matt deal in commercial real estate a lot. Yanni owns stuff. And Aaron Heelan has just come on, who's also a commercial real estate person. So, was real estate school super easy, very uncomplicated? I'm just curious.
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I just think it depends on how you're wired. The school is taught it's taught to help you pass the test. It doesn't teach you a whole lot about, it teaches you the laws and the regulations, but I don't think it teaches you how the game works.
Very interesting, William. Another level of complexity. Okay, Erin's listening in. She's in transit. Erin, we've started the show with what words come to mind for you with owner or ownership, and we've got a lot of great ones in the list. Hey, I'm just curious if Erin would come up with a different word. So Erin, think about ownership and owner, and we're going to give you a chance to just chime in with what words right on top for you. Yeah, Erin, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Paris, you're really putting me on the spot here for just hopping on the call.
Yes, I am. Well, we'll let you think. We'll let you think, Erin.
Okay,
we're going to have a whole
Thanks.
conversation. We'll see if we've got some ideas at the end. So ownership is a legal thing. It's a complicated thing. There are lots of structural pieces to it, and there's a game also, as William just noted. There's something going on that's about power and money, and it's not complicated. So as our owners and business owners and others are interested in learning about this, we wanted to have Kwame come today because we're having a lot of questions about how to do this and do it well. What is Isaba's lane? How do we support businesses that are thinking about this? And really, how do we help mobilize the community knowledge around this? And then use someone who has got technical expertise, like the lawyer in the room, or like others that have technical expertise for other pieces of this, to push that together to help our community be more powerful and help our community be more informed. So I asked Kwame today to think about, and Kwame, I'm sorry, I'm referring to you with your first name because it is the one that I have learned to easily pronounce. So I should just ask you to please say your name too, so that I can also refer to you in a more respectful way.
Almost everyone just calls me Kwame, but the last name is Osafo Ado.
Osafo Ado, which isn't hard. I'm sorry.
You never
Osafo
know.
Ado. Mr. Osafo Ado is on the phone today, and he is an awesome resource. And I asked him to help us think about this from a couple different perspectives, but the basic topic that I put to him was, why do people get in trouble with their leases? What are common things that cause business owners problems? And why are these issues so hard to resolve? So I think some of what we've talked about regarding ownership leads to this. When you're in a lease, what are some things you should be looking for if you're not schooled in either the commercial real estate structure or in the game? What are some things that you need to be looking for, and who can you go to help you sort some of that out before you sign? Because once you sign, we all know part of the game changes. So the part of the game's over once you sign. So I've asked Kwame to help us kind of get started on this conversation. And I know that Mr. Osafo Ado also has a lot of expertise that we could turn into a workshop or two, and that may be our future. So thank you for getting the topic started. And I'm going to turn things over to TruLegal. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you, Paris, for having me, and thanks, for having me. So it seems a lot of people online right now are well versed in the real estate world, and so maybe I can just describe what I can describe it more from you guys' perspective, like someone that already understands, a lot about commercial real estate. So I'm a small business lawyer, and a lot of the clients that I would see will not be clients who have the same background as you guys. Usually most of them would approach a commercial real estate lease the same way they would approach a residential real estate lease, or like a rental lease agreement, because that is what most people are more conversant with. A lot of people do not know much about commercial leases. So a lot of the issues that happen, a lot of the disputes that come up with commercial leases usually are because there are certain clauses that you have in commercial leases that will not be present in residential leases. And this is the first time the business owner is encountering that particular clause. So for instance, a lot of my clients tend to be immigrants. A lot of my clients tend to be people of color, and a lot of times, especially from the immigrant community, they assume that the rent is just the rent. There's no, for you guys who already have a background in real estate, they don't know about the triple net leases. And so they assume that if the rental agreement says it's $1,800 for rent, that is all the budget in their minds. But they don't put money aside for leases that require you to pay a portion of the operating expenses for the year for that particular property. And so they end up running into those kind of problems because, again, they were just looking at rent being a particular amount. Or Another thing that tends to happen is the fact that they wouldn't know about the fact that they are responsible for a lot of the maintenance of the property. Lots of them assume that if something were to happen, if the furnace broke down or whatever, they could just call the landlord and have it replaced like they did when they were living in their apartments. And so when a furnace breaks down the first time, they are shocked, and that can be very expensive if it's not something that has been budgeted for. And so what I've been discussing with Paris was to have a presentation, and that presentation was going to focus on the main areas where commercial tenants tend to have problems with their commercial landlords, highlights those, and then also highlight what the potential commercial tenants wants to look out for when they're going through their lease agreements. And then also suggest like free resources available for them to be able to review some of these leases before they're signed in the first place. Now, so we're thinking about having maybe a presentation just on that, and then another presentation for those who are currently already in leases. So there are some commercial tenants that have signed their leases and haven't had any problems yet. But then down the road, so for example, like with the railway extension, the light rail extension, it's, gone through certain commercial areas, and it wasn't something that some commercial tenants anticipated when they signed their leases 2-3 years ago. And these commercial leases go very long. So if you're already in one of those types of leases and this construction is going to be coming up soon, what kind of leverage do you have when you try to negotiate with your landlord? So that's the second presentation will ideally be focused more on strategies to negotiate with your landlord if you are already in a lease that has certain things that you hadn't thought about when you first signed it. Yeah, so that was what I discussed with Paris, and we haven't narrowed down, the particular, the nitty-gritty yet, but we're thinking that this could be beneficial to ESABA members who are either thinking about signing commercial leases or are currently in commercial leases.
Thanks, Kwame. Super good, super good. And these are great. This is a great kind of foreground. And I'm curious, Anne and Matt, when you're working with clients, are there particular things that you see often on the East Side that are like, yeah, this is sometimes, or in your experience, like this is sometimes where people are not looking in their lease for some of these features? They're just not taking into account. I mean, I haven't heard it called triple net leases. It's just because I don't know. Are there some other aspects like that in you guys' experience?
Well, it's exactly what Kwame was talking about. A lot of people, I had to learn what triple net lease meant. And that means you pay for everything, including a portion of the taxes. In our space here, there's multiple tenants. We have to chip in on the common area and also on the utilities for the common area. So we have our own Excel bill, and then we have the Excel bill for like the hallway and the elevator. And so, I mean, this is a multi-tenant building. So we had to learn all that. And I do think it was right on when he said some people think signing a lease is just like signing a lease for an apartment, and it isn't. And I'll give you an example. My daughter she has a hair salon in Signal Hills shopping mall, and her lease was pages and pages, and she had to have a certain amount of money in the bank. She had to have, the first month's rent, and like, we met together with the developer, and it was really very explicitly laid out, and they had high requirements. I think that's a good way to approach it. But with smaller businesses and the landlords aren't as maybe sophisticated as somebody that owns Signal Hill Shopping Center, they have all this language, it's boilerplate. And in some cases, it doesn't have the same amount of requirements. You know, they don't have to submit their bank information or, you know, then there's background checks and all of that. So sometimes if it's easier to get into a property and just sign a lease and you don't either understand or really drill down on all the legal language, it seems easier to just sign that lease. Okay, I found a place, I can get it. I couldn't get in Signal Hills, but I can get on Payne Avenue. And then once that lease is signed, that's well, it like the air conditioning breaks down and the tenant calls the landlord and the landlord says, guess what? That's, you know, you got the business in there that, and they're saying, well, I mean, it's not my building. No, but you're responsible. So that's what we run into a lot. And I don't want to start naming businesses, but a lot of that's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's not uncommon in what I'm hearing too. So I think one of the things that I remember on my residential lease is that, and some of the things that I've talked to some technical assistance providers about are there are good leases and worse leases. I mean, sometimes it's, you know, like, woo, and it's pages and pages and pages. And if you're not super familiar with this form, and communication, like there's some things in that lease that aren't just like what we're talking about. You know, the triple net leases are pretty common, right? And that's something that you could expect. But there are some leases that are actually very particularly bad. I mean, they're badly written. They're not written for the tenant. They're written for somebody else's advantage, the owner's advantage. And how can we begin to be more aware of where those big landmines are so that we don't blow up on them? And also, can you edit or change a lease when you're sitting there? And I think this is the advantage of bringing that lease to you know, to TruLegal or to ESNDC and saying, look, this is the lease I'm getting ready to sign. Will you review it with me? And maybe that's a first step we could start getting into people's minds. A sense about that, Mr. Sapoato or Anne, and we'll get to Yanni's question.
I'll just say one quick thing about that. I heard in a meeting, and I know you've heard this story before, Paris, and maybe others on the call, that somebody was responsible, a tenant was responsible for replacing the roof.
Yes.
Typically, that's not part of triple net. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So you're not responsible for replacing the whole roof, but there are commercial leases that would actually say up to that. And if you sign it, then you're responsible for it.
So there could be some clauses in there that are lining you up for more than even is in the typical lease. Or
Yeah.
if, I guess maybe there's also this, and Yanni, I want to come to you here. Like, so this is a question for just a minute or two from now. Like if it's not in the lease, how do you handle a dispute about it? So Yanni, and then maybe we'll get to that question.
Yeah. So, to your point about the roof, LA Fitness, for instance, my son is managing a couple of them, and that particular building, if the roof is leaking up to X amount, they are responsible for repairing it. When it comes to a total net of over 15,000, then the building owner comes in and fixes it. So yes, crazy. But my question is, when you have a 10-year, 15-year lease, and now a development, road construction, major development comes through, similar to Green Line. Is there any way to negotiate within that lease at that point? I mean, I know there's nothing stopping someone from trying to negotiate, but is there any legal clause that could be added to actually protect the small business if something like that were to arise during the lease term?
Yes, so a well-written lease agreement. So usually in a commercial lease agreement situation, it's usually the landlord that drafts the agreement and he gives it to you, the tenant, for you to decide. But if the tenant had a great lawyer, then usually they would have a clause within that contract that says if there's these types of disruptions, and this is a clause that should be added to a lot of commercial lease agreements that are located in, say, within the city and stuff like that, where there could be construction and stuff like that happening, where there could be maybe a rent reduction, or gives you an opportunity to see if you could sublease a place or assign the place to somebody else, if this was going to be like problematic for a long period of time and things like that. So you're totally right. You could have those types of clauses, and you have the lawyer draft it on your behalf if you're the commercial tenant, to protect you under those circumstances.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Since commercial lease agreements only get signed, maybe as William kind of noted here, like these are longer terms, like 5 to 20 years. If you're in the midst of a long-term lease, like when I was an apartment tenant, like it was in my landlord's interest to have a very small, short lease term so that could be renegotiated. And I was a good tenant. I'm not saying I was a bad tenant. Okay. But if you're in a long-term lease, how do you go about bringing this up to your landlord and saying, yeah, this wasn't something we anticipated. How do we work on this? Ideas about that?
So at that point, it's not really legal. It's all about negotiations. So you would have to be offering the landlord something that they don't already have. So usually your bargaining chip is usually time. I'll stay a little bit longer, but maybe for a reduction in rent, or maybe you might be providing certain types of value. You might provide value to the landlord. Say, I would make this upgrade, but then I would leave earlier, so you have to find some ways to bargain. And so usually, strategically, we'll go through the commercial lease agreements and figure out areas in which, there's some bargaining room for you, the commercial tenants.
I was just kind of note chattering that away. There you go. Like, here's another skill. And a lot of our business owners have this skill because they bargain in other domains of their business. Mm-hmm. But I think you nailed it for me right there. Looking with a lawyer at where your bargaining potential might be inside a lease you've already signed that you're in the middle of 5 years of would be the value of really having somebody to talk to about it. Here's a question that's come up quite a bit as well. Not quite a bit. I'm glad it's not quite a bit. But what if your leases run out? Your leases run out and you are, it just feels to me like you're on fumes, like you're just coasting. What happens? Like, it seems really like what happens if your leases run out, but you are just continuing to occupy the building and continuing to try to take care of it and continue trying to honor the original agreement? It seems like that would be an opportunity maybe to negotiate something new. How do you even start doing that? But also, if anything goes wrong, who's got rights if a lease is expired?
So ideally, if you're the commercial tenant and you want to continue staying, you want to talk to your landlord before your lease expires. And the reason I say that is because a lot of commercial lease agreements have this funny language in there that would say, oh, your lease ends in the next 2 years. But if you don't tell us that you're not renewing, then we assume, some of them would say, we assume that you're signing another 10-year lease. And so you're hooked on for another 10 years. Or some would say that you are like a holdover tenant and you pay 1.5 times most of those things. So you'll be paying 1.5 times the rent, 1.5 times this and that. And so there are penalties for not renewing before time.
So it would be incumbent on those businesses that have leases that have expired to grab that lease and come talk to you.
Yes, and sometimes the landlord will make things slide. So say your rent was $1,200 and your lease is expired, and then you're just in there just still paying 1,200. And then you approach the landlord saying, either I'm leaving or something to that extent. They may say, oh no, based on the lease, you're actually on hook for another 10 years, or based on the lease, I was actually supposed to be charging you, 1,600. I've just been taking the 1,200 just to be nice. And so these disputes happen quite a bit. But see, a lot of commercial landlords would have money to get a commercial lease agreement drafted, and those agreements would tend to be protective of the landlord, and so a lot of them would have ways in which it just doesn't lapse, or the lapse benefits them negatively. It always benefits them positively.
This makes sense. This makes so much sense. This is exactly the kind of thing I hoped we'd talk about. Are there things in the master class in this room right here, though? Many of you know more than I do about this. I wanted us to have an initial conversation so that we could start building a case for a more in-depth one. But I'm ready to just ask you guys for the in-depth questions. Like, what do you want to talk about here? What else do you think is in this topic that we need to uncover at this stage? Aaron, I saw you unmuted. Did you have something that you wanted to offer?
No, I was just unmuted because I was switching from my phone to my computer. But
Okay.
I
Well,
mean, I will offer, like,
ahead.
I just agree with what everybody else has been saying on this call. And I work with East Side Funders Group, but like you mentioned, I also do commercial real estate. And I would never, even though I do commercial real estate, I still would never sign a lease, even for myself, a commercial lease, without working with an attorney, for all the reasons mentioned. And I'll also add that I'm on the Neighborhood Star Board, and it is just very frequent that we get business owners coming in asking for grants because, like somebody said, like all of a sudden the roof's leaking. They didn't realize that was a responsibility, or the furnace goes out, or the HVAC goes out. And it's just so important to have both, a real estate agent that can negotiate the terms of your lease, but then to work with an attorney to really make sure you understand your lease and you're protected.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
For sure. We're going to switch gears in just a second, but I'm coming to Ann and Joy.
I have a question for Kwame. Typically, like if a tenant just says they just didn't understand, or they thought it was a different way, and then it goes to court. I mean, typically, are the landlords always like, is that lease that strong that it's always in favor of the landlord, like when they take it to court?
Yes. So the only time the court wouldn't side with the landlord, especially if the lease says it, is if the language itself is problematic. So if it says, if you're late one day, we can multiply your rent by 500, then that becomes problematic. And so that clause will be stricken out. But if it's something about usually things like, maintenance or repair, then usually the judge usually would say, you agreed with it when you signed it. So you're responsible.
I appreciate that. I was just thinking of one in particular where the tenant didn't realize they were paying the same square footage for the basement space, which they could only use for storage. And honestly, it was not a finished basement. It was dirt floor and stone wall, limestone walls. It really was not a great space, but they were paying the same price per square footage for the basement as the main floor where they were doing their business. And they were like, I didn't understand that. I don't think it's fair. We can't really use the basement. And she wanted to legally dispute that, but I didn't have any good advice for her.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to take it to court, but I don't know. Actually, they went out of business. So
I have a quick question for Kwame. We're talking about tenants from the tenant perspective.
Mhm.
What are some things, hey, I'm an owner, I come to you and I'm hiring you and I want you to write a lease that I deem is fair to me. What should we look for in a lease that's fair to both parties? I know we're talking about tenant stuff now, but and the reason why I'm asking this is I know with the SAB and ESDC, we've been talking about empowering business owners to become landlords and become owners. So let's look at it from the other's perspective as well. Maybe you could give us some insight as to, what should a lease look like that's fair for both parties? Because as an owner, I want to cover my butt too, right?
Most definitely, most definitely. And thanks for that question. So funny enough, I became a landlord the first time last year. And for a long time, I'd been volunteering in housing court, but on the tenant side of things. So, Hennepin County Housing Court, I work with through a nonprofit called Volunteer Lawyers Network, and I will usually defend tenants. And so now I'm a landlord, so it helps, to have the other perspective. You're right, there are a lot of small landlords that usually would need a lot of legal help because things can get very expensive from their perspective too. So usually, as a small landlord, the first thing you want to make sure is that you want to get paid. And the first thing is you want to make sure that your commercial lease has a personal guarantee attached to it. A lot of the commercial leases don't have personal guarantees. And so a lot of the small business owners are going to sign the lease under some LLC or an S Corp or something. And if that business fails, then you can only sue up to the entity. So you want a personal guarantee so that the individual themselves are part of it in case something did happen. Even though some landlords try to be sneaky by, using like a triple net lease and all that stuff. For me, I think it will benefit the commercial landlord to be really explicit for those areas, because it's going to take you about 2 or 3 months to find a new tenant, if not more, to find a new tenant, for them to get the funding, to make upgrades to the place, to actually start renting. And all that time, you're still paying mortgage on this place. And so you want to make sure that the tenant that is coming in can pay what needs to get paid, to make this a successful enterprise for you. And so you want to really explain, you're paying this rent, and apart from this rent, you're going to be paying this for square footage and this for, taxes. I would even tell my tenants, hey, I may be putting in the drive, I may be switching the driveway next year or something. It might cost so much, and so maybe this should be something you're anticipating in your next year's rent payments, and that also helps for them to have realistic expectations so far as the how much more in rents they will need to pay. Similarly, I would talk to them about the fact that they would have to do repairs and maintenance, because usually in commercial real estate deals, usually the tenant almost owns this place, like what we talked about. If the roof doesn't fall in and other things need to be done, usually the tenant is responsible for that. And so I want to make sure that the tenant really understands these points. And so if I have like an old furnace, I may encourage them to get some kind of insurance that covers it, those appliances, or anticipates that, they may need to replace it soon. And that's just creating expectations for the tenants, because again, for us, we do understand what these real estate commercial leases entail and stuff, but for the average person coming in, they're just looking at this as a rental agreement. And most people say, oh, my rent is $1,500, that's all the budget's in their mind. So you just need to retrain them that where they have this other perspective that, it could end up being a lot more. Now, usually once your rent is covered, and then you have a personal guarantor, that is like some of the most important parts of your commercial lease agreements. The other parts, sometimes, so for example, like if I had to draft a commercial lease agreement for you, then say there was a fire and, we haven't determined if, the building is something that needs to be totally demolished or if, it's still reusable and stuff like that. Usually, I'll try to negotiate more leeway for, that decision to be made, before the tenant is able to like break the lease and stuff like that. So, gets the landlord more time. But I would say, again, usually the most important part of commercial lease agreement, at least, if one is being drafted for you as a commercial landlord, would be to make sure that the parts about, payments are very clearly stated.
And it seems like there's an art, but it seems like it's possible to try to get some balance in something that's fair to both. And I think that would be another topic that we could explore a little bit more, William, because I think that's essentially what we want to try to do. And that also gives some more knowledge to like, what does fair look like? What does actually adequate look like? And that's part of what's missing when the leasee comes in to talk about that lease when they're 2 or 3 years into the 5-year lease and things aren't going so well, right? There are things they didn't understand on the front end. I want to ask us to talk about one other thing here at the final quarter hour of our show. We titled this "To Own or Not to Own." One of the main anti-displacement strategies we're talking about on the East Side is small business owners owning their building or getting into ownership. Are there things when you're going from leasing to owning that you really need to, I assume, just asking a question here almost rhetorically, that you need to be looking at as you're thinking about owning something that are a big step up, that's, kind of like the big quantum leap from renting it to owning it in the legal domain, I guess. I mean, senses of that, Kwame?
From leasing to owning, trying to think about some of the legal. Usually it's more economics for me in the sense that like that does the business really need this building? Is the business going to survive the next 5-10 years? That makes it necessary to purchase this building. So most businesses would fail first 5 years or whatever that statistic is. So if you just started a business 2 months ago and there's an opportunity to really buy this building, is it time to buy it yet, or do you want to be in there for some time first to determine that? Another thing that business owners need to think too about is capacity. So maybe you had a little bakery and you're using a little bakery within this commercial space for whatever you're making, but if demand grows, does it really make sense to sign a 15-year lease now, or do you just want to buy it? I'm sorry, if you purchased, how much more would this place be able to produce for you? Because getting rid of commercial property, again, is not as easy as getting rid of residential property. As commercial sits on the market for a little bit longer, and all the time you're paying the mortgage. So those are some of the things to think about.
What about like liability issues? If somebody gets hurt on the premises, is that going to be on the leaser or the leasee? When you're moving from, leasing to ownership, who typically is liable? So let's say, I guess a slip and fall is the business's issue, but what if somebody slips and falls in the parking lot that the owner was responsible for? Maintaining, does that fall on the ownership or the person in the lease? Or
so yeah, with the scenario that you described, someone fall in the parking lot. Now, so now let's assume in scenario one, you are just leasing the place, and then someone came, fell in the parking lot, injured themselves. Under those circumstances, most likely the landlord is going to be responsible for the injury. But usually landlords require you to have insurance. So your commercial lease agreements may require you to have insurance that also covers that part of the parking lot. And so your insurance ends up paying and the landlord is not responsible. So usually for liability reasons, when you switch, it doesn't make that much of a difference for liability reasons. So if you became the landlord, then either you would have insurance that covers that area, but if you're renting this commercial property that you purchased to somebody else, you would require that they have insurance that hopefully covers this area, and so you are not held responsible.
Makes sense. Thank you. Super good. We are coming to the end of our hour here. Really good conversation. Are there other questions that are burning, and or you can drop some of them in the chat too? But yeah, are there other things on your mind, or where does this conversation go next would be a good conversation for the gallery. Was this helpful? And what are the things that are outstanding? We may not talk about them today, but like other topics in this conversation, or yeah. So where does this go next?
Well, I'm thinking here, we had a conversation at our board meeting this week and, about technical assistance and my first thought is like, how many people who are starting up their mom and pop business can afford to hire Kwame to look at their lease, right? Like, for instance, I just recently had a contract drawn up. I contacted my lawyer. That cost me like $700, right? That's a lot of money for a very small business, right? So I guess my thought is, do we as a community start talking about putting together some kind of fund that people could tap into to hire a local attorney for some basic consultations, number one. And then number two, I think what you and Kwame are talking about, maybe putting a full presentation together, I think sounds wonderful, because I think there's a lot of businesses, both small and large, that need to hear this. And I think, again, we're missing the point on both the leasee and the leaseor need to hear some of this stuff too. I think there's some owners that could hear that, hey man, you might have been consulted that to have this really crappy lease, that maybe you should relook at that and revisit that. It could be you could still be protected and be a little more fair and honest. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, William. Go, Ann.
William, those are excellent points. And I just want to point out our landlord here at Plaza Latina works with all his tenants. There have been time to time where they have gotten behind on the lease. He really understands, I think, maybe the fact that there's a cost involved in turnover. So there really are some good landlords out there. And especially, during COVID and things like that, he was very understanding. So we need more landlords like that. But I also think it's a great idea if Kwame could come and do a workshop, and then we could also partner with you, ESNDC, about our ETAP program, because the ETAP program has resources to do exactly what you're talking about, William. There's an up to amount, so it's not an endless pot of money, and it is the type of technical assistance that could be both helpful, education wise, to get people more understand the commercial leases more, but also to support a fee for a lawyer.
Thank you, Ann. Super good. Other comments about next steps? These are great. I also noticed that the Otter just dropped some presentation summaries in the chat that are like right on target. AI. Oh my goodness.
I know. I'm like, I might have to get an Otter account now.
That is an unintended consequence of this meeting. I'm just saying, no otters were harmed in the making of this video. Okay. So other folks with some next steps, and Aaron, good to see you on camera. We have also had Josh join from Isaba's board and Rachel from the city of St. Paul, PED. So Rachel Weiker's on, and Yolanda, I think that's Yolanda Davis from Metro State, and also a great Isaba collaborator. So yeah, any final comments on like where we go next with this topic?
I was just gonna say one more thing.
on, Erin.
With anyone, because there's so many people here working in commercial real estate. Like if there's anyone is working with a business owner to sign a lease, or with a building owner to or a business to buy a building on the east side, and you're running into some of these like financial gaps, please reach out to me with Eastside Funders Group. I see the establish a fund for access to legal consultations. Like I can't promise anything, but this might be something we can help with. So please let me know if that's an issue, because I'll of course bring it to my board and see if we can do anything around that.
Well, so maybe
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead,
go
Ann.
ahead.
I was going to say
No.
maybe a follow-up conversation is ESNDC, TruLegal, and Isaba talking a little bit about what it would take and how many hours and how it works. And Kwame has got an awesome platform, but also some ideas about this, right? You serve the small business community. We just want you to serve us more, and talk about that and bring that to Erin.
One other thought I had was we could talk to some state legislators and ask them to re-up the Main Street program. Because honestly, that was the way it was structured, with $2 of business owner money to $1 of state money is not ideal. And the last round of Main Street money we had, the St. Paul Foundation stepped in and also came in with a match, which made it, I think it just made it possible for all the projects that got done. But those were huge, and those were roofs and floors and HVAC systems and a lot of stuff that our money that's only dedicated to facade work can't cover. But it was a great program, and it was coupled with a lot of funds. And they're not doing it again. It's not being reintroduced, but there's a lot of successes. I'll send you I just got a final report yesterday from the foundation. I'll send
Very
it out.
exciting. I mean, so that's actually material to like help when leases have that gap, and the small business owner doesn't see it coming, and suddenly it's a truck through the front of the place. I like the idea of thinking about the educational angle in this and getting more understanding on the east side about what's going on in the midst of leases, both on the owner and on the leasee side. So let's follow up on that too. Rachel's come on camera. Rachel with the city, a PED angle on this, or a place that PED's lane kind of plays, or some spot you'd like to be in, or just you'd like to be on the spot. Just say hi.
Oh yeah, I might just say hi, because I'm thinking it through and thinking through of like how we can support that. And I'll be honest, we're fairly limited at this point. But other than, like whatever materials and education that you are putting out there, I think is really, really relevant and helpful. And we do have a good audience with our newsletter of about 5,000 businesses and individuals in the city of St. Paul. And so we'd be happy to promote more of those education and workshops and information.
Super good. All good.
Yeah.
All right, Erin's got to go. So anyway, final 2 minutes. We've got announcements in the chat. Just want to point you to other things that Isaba is doing in addition to this follow-up we just talked about, which we'll take some note of and follow up on. I want to thank TruLegal and Kwame Safoato for being with us today, and all of you fantastic Eastside members. The next thing we're doing is we're meeting with the mayor to run his budget workshop, and we're doing it at Sunray Lanes. I just can't even believe how much fun that sounds like it's going to be. I mean, we're going to try to make it as much fun as it can be. We're going to be in District 1 at Sunray Lanes on May 23rd with the mayor, talking about his budget workshop. And we can talk about the issues in District 1 and District 2, which will be great. We're also going to do some work with the grand opening of a new health and wellness center over on the east side on May 21st. That's Micheline Colstock, who's an Asaba member, making that happen. Art in the Hollow is coming June 1st. Big events coming to the east side, including Dragon Fest on Lake Phelan, July 13th, and other amazing events going on the east side that you can submit directly to our website. So we'll be working on, I think, cooking this idea with TruLegal and ESNDC and other partners for a workshop a little later in the year. We're going to miss the summer season because there are big summer events coming, and there's also just a limited amount of focus. But if you've got contacts that you need to make now with businesses that are in trouble now or have questions now, let's give TruLegal just 1 second to say, like, should we contact you? Kwame, do you have capacity to work with us on some of those things that are on fire?
Most definitely.
I'm going to invite you to just put your contact information in the chat for folks that don't have it, but also to say, if you're having trouble finding anyone on this call or anywhere else in the Asaba universe, you can always just contact me, and I will.
And then maybe
get you connected.
Paris, maybe offline, we could hop on an email thread with Kwame and talk about sitting down and doing a lunch or something like that. And I'd like to connect with him and definitely would have some referrals for him and see how we can be of benefit to him and he could be of benefit to Asaba and the community.
I love it.
Thanks.
Yes. You've got a lunch date now already. You got lunch out of this. All right.
All right. Thank you. Pleasure to meet you, Kwame. And thank you for everybody for on the call. And Paris, if you have the capacity to just set it up, I'll take it from there and we can get something together.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get the thread started.
All right. Thank
thanks,
you, guys.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to y'all later. Have a great day.